If one were to make a list of films that caused a stir in 2015, Spotlight would probably be on it. Directed by Tom McCarthy, Spotlight retells events that occurred during an investigation into child exploitation that had been covered up by the Catholic Church in Boston, Massachusetts. The investigation was conducted by a team of journalists with the Boston Globe in 2001. This team, a team that was mostly comprised of Catholics who were part of the community, made the difficult decision to take on the Boston Archdiocese and face the consequential challenges that would come with that. So today, we're going to talk about the story behind Spotlight. Boston, Massachusetts is the largest Catholic city in the United States of America. And the case that inspired the film mostly started with an investigation into the crimes of Father John Geoghegan, a retired priest who was accused of exploiting over 80 boys during his 31 years serving as a minister, and evolved into the discovery of an entire cover-up that involved scores of other local priests. The scandal was covered by a team of around 8 journalists, with Ben Bradley Jr., Sasha Pfeiffer, and Walter Robinson being among the most famous members and public faces of the group. As part of the investigation, Sasha Pfeiffer interviewed ex-priest Ronald H. Paquin over several months. And over the course of these meetings with Pfeiffer, Paquin admitted to taking advantage of young boys over the years. It turned out that there had been a recurring problem of children being exploited by various local priests. In order to protect the reputation of the church, priests who mistreated children were often put on sick leave to undergo a period of psychotherapy before being moved to a new parish to continue working as priests, only to reoffend, be put through psychotherapy, and moved to new parishes over and over again without the authorities being informed of what was happening. Cardinal Bernard Law, who had been the Archbishop of Boston since 1984, filed documents in a court submission in June 2001. These documents revealed that Law had Geoghegan assigned to a new parish, knowing that Geoghegan had been previously accused of preying on boys from various local families. According to a 2010 report by The Guardian, Law's initial argument was that when he transferred Geoghegan to his new parish, neither he, the Catholic Church, nor indeed society as a whole understood how difficult it was to change the behavior. When the investigation team acquired access to church documents regarding Geoghegan's conduct, they found around 10,000 pages that detailed a total of 84 different lawsuits against Father Geoghegan. As the investigation continued, the Globe reporters were quietly informed about numerous cases that had happened back in the 1990s and had been settled secretly with clauses that prohibited the victims and their families from publicly discussing it. The reporters decided to look for records of these cases, all to find that the documents described to them by these informants did in fact exist. However, the church, being protective of its reputation, kept the documents related to these events sealed for years by their request. The Globe wanted the records to be released. The members of the Archdiocese argued that they were constitutionally entitled to keep the records confidential, and that it was unnecessary for the media to have access to these records. The Globe and the victims' legal representatives countered that the public interest in the Geoghegan case far outweighed the church's desire for privacy or to avoid negative publicity. In November 2001, a judge ruled that the documents should be released, and the public learned even more shocking details about the Geoghegan case. The reporters found a letter that a bishop had written to Cardinal Law, advising him not to assign Geoghegan to a new parish, given his history of inappropriate behavior. Michael Paulson, a former religious affairs correspondent for the Boston Globe, who was part of exposing this case, described the public's response to the record, stating, "The impact was immense and immediate. The reason our coverage caused such crisis was not that the documents we had showed priests had hurt children, but that the bishops knew about it and still failed to keep those priests away from children." The report revealed that there were cases involving Father John Geoghegan going back to the 1960s, and that despite being repeatedly sent to psychotherapy, the incidents continued until his retirement in 1993. It also showed that throughout that whole time, parents had been coming forward and asking for help. Marietta Desord was one of those parents. Back in the 1970s, she began advocating for her 3 sons and 4 nephews who had been preyed on by Father Geoghegan. She wrote to Cardinal Umberto Medeiros, who was the Archbishop of Boston at the time, about her concerns, and was scolded by other parishioners and some church authorities for speaking out. When talking about Marietta's appeals to Cardinal Medeiros, Michael Paulson recalled, she'd written this incredibly painful and poignant letter to the Cardinal at the time. You could feel all her passion for the Church, her deep respect for the Cardinal, and her shock and pain that despite her dozens of complaints, Father Geoghegan was still continuing to work with the children. That was what really got to people, I think. The documents also proved that the Boston Archdiocese had, in fact, privately settled claims made by Catholic families against 70 of its priests in the 1990s, just like the quiet informants had said. Once the story grew in notoriety in Boston, it quickly spread across the US before becoming big news around the world. January 2002 saw over 500 victims come forward and file claims. By the middle of the year, the Church responded to the crisis by creating an American chapter that set protocols for the protection of children and young people. By December of that year, Cardinal Bernard Law resigned from his position after these documents revealed that he knew there was a problem and failed to respond with measures to protect the boys. Father John Geoghegan went to jail and passed away aged 68 at the hands of another inmate while serving a 9 to 10-year sentence. Sean Patrick O'Malley replaced Bernard Law as Archbishop of Boston in 2003. O'Malley initiated a zero-tolerance policy against exploitation and instituted one of the most comprehensive policies in the Catholic Church. He is a member of the Pontifical Commission for the Protection of Minors and was a supporter of the film. In 2009, the Columbia Journalism Review published a 22-page case study that further expounded on the Roman Catholic Church's attempts to conceal reported incidents, with as many as 250 cases going unresolved for years. Michael Paulson believes that the Boston Globe's reporting of this case was so impactful for 3 reasons, stating, first, we got to the documents. We ended up with material relating to more than 100 priests. We had letters from parents, letters to and from priests, masses of internal church documents showing exploitative priests being repeatedly moved. Also, the internet enabled our reporting to be read all over. And I think there was a kind of evolution of culture, a moment in history when people were willing to talk critically about religion. Often in the past, that just hasn't been possible. This case demanded accountability from the Church, and in the aftermath, several states, including Massachusetts, introduced laws that require clergy to report any knowledge of child exploitation to the civil authorities. In concluding his interview with The Guardian in 2010, Paulson shared this: "The Catholic Church is an enormous institution. Certainly, some bishops and many members understand the enormity of what has happened, but there are still plenty who believe this is all an anti-Catholic conspiracy, that the Church is being persecuted. The damage is real, but the Church is not of one mind as to whether it is best to apologize and reform or resist and fight. That argument has not yet been decided." I came away from this story very happy that the report came out and that the public was able to learn about what was happening in their community. I also found myself feeling very inspired by Marietta Desord's story. I wanted to look more into what she's up to these days and learn that she sadly passed away from cancer back in 2019. I think that she may have been one of the most important heroes of this story, because she was willing to be spurned by her community to ensure that her family's experiences were heard, and that her sons, nephews, as well as other at-risk children were protected. It would take over 20 years for anyone to truly listen to her. But she didn't give up. She was a woman of deep and profound faith who held her ground and stayed true to her convictions. To do that takes a lot of courage, and I applaud her for her strength. As I read about this case, I noticed that once the story broke and the documents were released, part of the Catholic community felt deceived by the Church's failure to address rather than hide the problem, and others felt annoyed that the issue was brought up in the first place and that it was unnecessary to report on it. I think that no matter what opinion a person has regarding whether or not the report should have been made public, the thing is, Catholicism is the largest denomination in all of Christendom, and its high numbers in membership is the reason why Christianity is the most practiced religion on earth. So naturally, if something corrupt happens within its hierarchy, the world is inevitably going to notice. That's not a bad thing. It's embarrassing for those who may want to hide these issues, but not bad. Because accountability is what keeps the powerful in check, and an authority's subordinates are supposed to hold him accountable if he mistreats them. People should be able to practice their faith in peace and have the information they need to protect themselves and their loved ones from those who may try to use their beliefs to take advantage of them. In order to do that, the public has to be informed about what religious authorities are doing, so that if a boundary is crossed, they can hold those authorities accountable. Religious affiliation is an important tradition that is not only practiced by adults, but is also passed down to children coming up. And people should be able to practice and share their religion with their children in a safe and supportive environment. That's what these religious traditions are for, to celebrate our connection to God and to each other, and to enjoy the privilege of sharing those practices with those close to us. So, have you seen the film Spotlight? Do you think that the reforms of the early 2000s are successfully protecting children? Are there any other serious issues you think are still being kept in the dark? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and I'll see you next time.